All right, welcome. Today, we're doing something really cool. We're going to get inside the head of a game designer and break down a board game concept called the Alchemist's Lab. We're going to see how it goes from just a tiny idea to a full-blown game of strategy and, well, a little bit of chaos.
You know, every single game out there starts with just a spark, right? For this one, it was this simple idea. And what's amazing is right there in that one sentence, you can see the entire DNA of the game. You've got this careful, scientific work of alchemy, but it's constantly at risk from total disaster. And it's that push and pull, that tension between creation and chaos that we're really going to dig into.
Okay, so first things first. You can't have a disaster in a lab if you don't have a lab, right? So this first part is all about laying that groundwork. We're talking about the main goal of the game and the key pieces you'll be playing with.
So, the whole game runs on a really popular mechanic called worker placement. It's basically the engine of your lab. You've got these little alchemist tokens, your workers, and you get to decide where they go to work each turn. But here's the catch. Once a spot's taken, it's usually blocked for everyone else. That means you've got to make some really tough calls about what's most important, turn after turn.
And here they are, the four main pillars of the whole game. First, you've got your lab tiles. This is your workshop, your playground. Then, the alchemist tokens. These are your people, your workforce. And then you've got these two forces constantly battling it out. The disaster cards bringing the chaos, and the healing medicines that let you fight back and clean up the mess.
All right, so we've got all the pieces, but how does it actually play? I mean, what do you do on your turn? Any good game needs what we call a game loop, a clear, repeatable structure that gives the whole thing a nice rhythm.
It's all broken down into 3 simple steps. First, you build stuff. That's the building phase, where you get to expand your lab. Second, you do stuff. That's the placing phase, where you put your alchemist to work. And third, you deal with stuff. That's the event phase, where you draw a card and, well, see what fate has in store for you.
And you can even see in the design notes just how deliberate this flow is. This isn't random at all. It's a structure specifically designed to build up that tension. Think about it. You invest in your lab, you decide where your precious workers go, and only after all that do you find out what crazy new problem you have to deal with. It's brilliant.
So in that building phase, you're adding tools like these to your workshop. But here's the key thing to get. These tiles aren't just for looks. Not at all. Each one is a spot where you can take an action. You put a worker on the crucible, you're mixing ingredients. You put one on the research desk, you're discovering new recipes. The way you build your lab is your strategy. It's that simple.
Okay, let's be real. A game where you just build a perfect lab and nothing ever goes wrong, that would be super boring, right? A good game absolutely needs conflict. And in the Alchemist's Lab, that conflict comes bubbling and brewing right out of a deck of disaster cards.
I love this part. This deck of cards is what I like to call the disaster engine. It's the heart of all the tension in the game. It's what guarantees that your lab is never, ever 100% safe. And that uncertainty, that's what makes every single decision you make, what to build, where to put your alchemists, suddenly feel so much more important. So let's take a look at a classic lab accident, a mercury spill. Bam! The effect is super simple and immediate. Your healthy alchemist, who's a green token, is now sick, and they turn into a yellow token. It's this brilliant, clear visual cue that screams, uh-oh, I've got a problem I need to deal with and fast.
But it's not always that straightforward. Check this out. A viral infection. This one's a little different. It's conditional. Got the right medical supplies? You're fine. If you don't, your alchemist is completely out of commission. This is so smart because it shows how the game's chaos isn't just about random bad luck. It's actively testing how well you've prepared for different kinds of trouble.
So the game is constantly throwing these curveballs at you, but, and this is so important, it also gives you the tools to solve them. You're not just a victim here. So let's flip the script and talk about the solutions, because this is where the real strategy of the game kicks in.
Okay, this right here is the big aha moment in the game's design. For a lot of disasters, there's a specific direct counter. A toxic fume release card gets drawn. That sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? But if you were smart and you planned ahead by building a fume hood, you just solved the problem before it was ever even a problem. It creates this amazing back and forth of threat and preparation.
And look, it's spelled out right there in the rules. The tile's function is super clear. It ventilates fumes. The benefit? Even clearer. It protects your workers. This isn't just a cute, thematic touch. It's a core game mechanic that actively rewards you for thinking ahead and building your lab strategically.
But what if you didn't see it coming?
What if you couldn't prevent the disaster? Well, you can still fix it, and I absolutely love how this works. Your alchemist gets sick or burned, and their token just changes color. Easy to see. But healing isn't just some generic heal button. Nope. To cure sickness, you have to use salt. To heal a burn, you need vitriol. The theme is baked right into the gameplay. It's so elegant.
All right, let's bring it all home. We've looked at the pieces, the turn structure, the things that can go wrong, and how you can fix them. So what's the big picture design philosophy here? What are the key ideas that make this whole concept click?
So, what's the final formula? It really boils down to 4 main ideas that all work together. First, you've got this great balance of risk and reward. The chance of disaster makes every little success feel like a huge victory. Second, you, the player, have agency. You're never just helpless. There's always a tool or a strategy to fight back. Third, the theme and the mechanics are totally intertwined. You're not just healing, you're using actual alchemical ingredients to fix specific problems. And last but not least, everything makes sense. There's a clear cause and effect, which makes the game feel fair, even when things are literally exploding.
And that pretty much wraps up our deep dive. It's just so cool to see how a single sentence can blossom into a game with all these layers of strategy, theme, and tension. So I'll leave you with this question. Put on your game designer hat for a second. What's the one rule you would add to the Alchemist slab? I'd love to know. Thanks so much for joining me.
So let's talk about what it really means to work with creative AI. It's not just about pushing a button and getting a picture, right? We're going to follow the journey of one single creative idea and see how a real conversation between a person and an AI can take a simple concept and turn it into something, well, something totally unexpected and way more interesting. But how does that partnership actually work? I mean, how do you go from just giving orders to having a genuine creative dialogue with an AI? That is the big question we're digging into. See, it's all about shifting your mindset. You're not just commanding a tool. You're collaborating with a partner. Okay, so our little journey here kicks off with a super straightforward request. A user just asks the AI to create an image of a papercraft alchemy lab. That's it. No complicated jargon, no technical commands, just a clean, simple concept. This is our starting line. And check this out. Look at how the AI immediately runs with this. It doesn't just register papercraft lab. It starts adding all this character, describing it as whimsical and cozy and in a diorama style. It took that core concept and immediately started painting a much richer, more atmospheric picture. This is the first real volley in the conversation. And boom, here's what came out of that first exchange. The AI delivered exactly what it described, a beautiful, detailed, and completely finished diorama. It's a perfect little art piece. But, and this is key, if you look closely, it's a static scene. It's something you look at, not something you do something with. And that's exactly where the user got a new idea. This right here, this is the aha moment. This is the pivot that turns a simple request into a true creative collaboration. The user's goal totally evolved. It wasn't enough to just see the lab anymore. They wanted to bring it to life, to turn that piece of art into an actual activity. So, to make this happen, the user fine-tunes their request. And you gotta notice the new keywords they bring in. Cut out able images for a papercraft how-to book. They aren't just describing a scene anymore. Now they're describing a toolkit. And look at how the AI responds. It completely gets the shift in purpose. It doesn't just chop up the components, it starts thinking like a craft book designer. It's adding these super functional details like dotted lines and little instructions like cut and fold. It's not just making something pretty anymore, it's co-creating the utility of the image. And this is the final result of that conversation. It's not a diorama anymore, it's a blueprint, a full-on DIY kit. Every single piece is laid out, ready for action. The same core idea, that alchemy lab, has been completely transformed from a piece of art you look at into an interactive project you can make. So, the really crucial thing to see here is this leap from a diorama to DIY. We went from a static scene meant for viewing to an interactive kit meant for creating. We shifted from a finished art piece to basically a box of parts. This wasn't just a minor refinement, it was a complete conceptual evolution, and it was all driven by that back and forth between the user and the AI. You know, what we just witnessed can be broken down into a simple but really powerful process. You start with a clear idea, Then, and this is important, you really analyze what the AI gives you. Is it what you wanted? Or even better, does it spark a new idea? Then you go back and refine your instructions with new, specific details based on that evolving goal. And you just repeat this, you iterate until you've truly collaborated on a final creation. And that's really the key takeaway here. The most powerful results, they don't come from treating AI like some kind of vending machine for images. They come from treating it like a creative partner. You bring the vision, it brings the execution, and maybe even some inspiration. And together, you build on each other's ideas. So, seeing how an idea can completely morph from a picture into a project in just a few steps, the real question is, what conversation are you going to start? What simple idea do you have that could be transformed into something completely unexpected? Because truly, the only limit is your own imagination. Today, we're diving into the mind of one of the most fascinating and honestly contradictory figures of the entire Renaissance, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. On the one hand, he was this celebrated, brilliant scholar. But on the other, he was a man who was literally condemned for practicing the dark arts. His whole life, his whole legacy, is just one big, amazing puzzle. You have to understand, to people back then, Agrippa was the quintessential magician. I mean, he was the real-life model for the legendary Dr. Faustus. The guy who sells his soul to the devil for knowledge and power. And that whole reputation was built on his most famous and, of course, his most infamous work. And this is the central mystery of Cornelius Agrippa. In one book, De Occulta Philosophia, he lays out this incredibly detailed, comprehensive guide to magic. Then, in another book, De Vanitate, he writes this blistering attack claiming that all human knowledge is totally worthless. So how? How could the same person write two books that seem to completely contradict each other? Well, in this explainer, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to unpack this paradox, we'll explore his incredible world of magic, take a look at his assault on knowledge, and then finally, we'll find the key that unlocks the whole mystery. And what it reveals is a surprisingly consistent vision that you'll see still kind of hits home today. All right, first up, let's dive into the book that made him a legend, De Occulta Philosophy, which means On the Occult Philosophy. To get a handle on Agrippa the magician, we first have to understand the world he was living in and trying to make sense of. So, for Agrippa, the universe wasn't just a bunch of dead matter floating around. No, it was this living, breathing organism. He believed everything was deeply connected, from the simplest rock on the ground to the most distant star. Magic, then, wasn't about breaking the laws of nature. It was about understanding these secret connections. But why? What was the goal? And this is absolutely crucial. For Agrippa, magic had nothing to do with summoning demons to get rich or famous. The entire point of his whole system was to prepare the soul for something he called felicity, a state of pure divine enlightenment, a final reunion with God. It was a spiritual journey, not some get-rich-quick scheme. So how in the world do you achieve a state like that? Well, Agrippa laid out three main ways the human mind could receive wisdom directly from the divine. And these weren't things you could just go learn at a university. They required a total shift in your state of consciousness. The first path was through something he called furores, or divine frenzies. This is so clever. He basically took the old Greek gods and repurposed them. So Apollo wasn't a literal god, but the intelligence of the sun, and it could download prophetic knowledge straight into your brain. The inspiration you get from Venus wasn't just about romance, it was a little taste of the divine love that holds the entire universe together. Okay, so we've got this beautiful, complex spiritual system all laid out. But then Agrippa writes De Venati, and basically seems to want to tear the whole thing down. Let's move on and explore this profound assault on knowledge, because this is where the paradox really starts to bite. And Agrippa pulls no punches. I mean, listen to that. In this book, he argues that every single field of human knowledge, we're talking logic, math, medicine, even religion, is just fundamentally broken. He saw them not as roads to truth, but as human inventions, totally tangled up in ego, error, and argument. So here's his main point. For Agrippa, capital T truth was just way beyond the reach of our human intellect. Our senses fool us all the time, and logic is just a little game we play, based on assumptions we can't even prove. He came to the conclusion that the only way to really grasp the nature of reality was through pure, simple faith in divine revelation. And that brings us right back to the central problem, doesn't it? If he truly believed all human systems were useless, why on earth would he spend years building the most detailed, elaborate system of magic in the entire Renaissance? Was he a hypocrite? A fraud? Or is there something else going on here that we're just not seeing? The answer, it turns out, isn't about choosing one Agrippa over the other. It's about finding the single idea that makes them both make perfect sense. So now, let's unlock that very idea. And the key is to see Agrippa as a kind of pure empiricist. So what does that mean? Well, it means he was deeply, deeply skeptical of theories. You know, the big abstract systems that people create to explain how the world works. But at the same time, he was incredibly open to what he considered facts, individual reports of things that happened, especially if lots of old books said they did. This slide is the perfect window into his mind. To Agrippa, these weren't theories. They were just reported phenomena. He'd read in ancient texts that stags eat a certain herb to heal themselves, or that basil could somehow create scorpions. Since he had no scientific theory to disprove it, and all these historical authorities backed it up, he just accepted them as data points, facts about the world.
And suddenly, just like that, the paradox vanishes. His skepticism was aimed squarely at man-made theories. His magic, on the other hand, was, to him, just a big collection of these observed facts about the world's hidden connections. His skepticism and his belief in magic weren't at war at all. They were actually growing from the exact same root.
So once you see this unified vision, it really helps you appreciate his lasting legacy. For our last section here, let's look at the impact he had, not just as a magician, but as a really complex thinker whose work was read, argued about, and even copied for centuries to come. And you can see that influence so clearly. I mean, look at this. On the left, you have a passage from Agrippa's book in 1533. On the right, a poem from more than 100 years later. The borrowing is, well, it's pretty obvious. Agrippa gave poets and thinkers this whole new language for talking about the cosmos that they drew on for generations. All of this leaves us with one final thought. You know, Agrippa was wrestling with a world full of conflicting information, trying desperately to figure out what was a solid fact and what was just a theory somebody made up. And that dilemma feels incredibly modern, doesn't it? In our own age of information overload, we face the exact same challenge. How do we decide what's real and what's just a good story that everyone happens to be telling? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going on a quest, but we're not just looking for pretty pictures. We're hunting for real meaning in a visual language that has totally fascinated thinkers for centuries. So let's dive in and explore the web's hidden archives of alchemical art. You know, if you've ever typed alchemical symbols into a search engine, you know the struggle. You just get hit with this tidal wave of generic and honestly often inaccurate images. So how do you find the authentic stuff? You know, the pieces that actually whisper the secrets of the alchemist's quest for transformation, buried under all that digital noise. Because that's really what this is all about. A language. See, alchemical art isn't just about illustration. It's a really complex system of emblems, allegories, and philosophical scenes, all designed to get across some incredibly profound ideas. And just like with any language, you gotta know where to find the right dictionary. Okay, so where do we even begin? Well, we start with the most reliable, highest quality sources out there, the great scholarly collections. These are your foundational libraries, the ones curated by experts who really know their stuff. Think of these three as your essential first stops. Seriously, bookmark these. Adam McLean's gallery is just fantastic for its focused, curated collection of emblems. The Alchemy website is this massive research hub, and it has an amazing art section. And then you have the Science History Institute, which offers these beautiful, high-quality scans of everything from rare books to paintings. These are the gold standard for sure. So now we know where these great libraries are. Let's talk about what's inside them. We're going straight to the source, to the actual historical texts where these incredible images first showed up. You've probably heard this famous Hermetic phrase, right? That which is below is like that which is above. It just perfectly captures the spirit of these works. This ancient idea tells us that the images aren't just, pictures of chemical reactions. Nope, they are maps of the cosmos, showing the dance between the heavens, the earth, and the human soul. They were really designed to be meditated on. And this brings us to a specific treasure map. Instead of a vague search for alchemy, try looking for a particular text, like the Rosarium Philosophorum from 1550. The results you'll get are just incredible. Its series of symbolic woodcuts are some of the most powerful images in all of alchemy, famously showing the mystical union of the Solar King and the Lunar Queen. So this brings us to a really crucial distinction. The curated sources we've been talking about, those are like scholarly collections. They're full of context, perfect for deep research. But there's another kind of resource, the broader archives. They are huge and fantastic for visual inspiration, but they often lack that rich context. So let's talk about how to navigate those. Now, if your goal is maybe less about deep academic research and more about just getting some broad visual inspiration, then it's time to cast a wider net. But a little word of caution here. This is where you need a really sharp eye to tell the real deal from the generic stuff. Places like the Public Domain Image Archives or Wikimedia Commons are absolute treasure troves, if you know what you're looking for. The trick is unlocking them with the right search terms. So, instead of just typing alchemy, use the names of specific books, like Rosarium Philosophorum, or more technical terms like alchemical emblems. It makes a world of difference. All right, for those of you who want to go even deeper, let's gear up. We're about to go from being a casual tourist to a serious digital archaeologist. These are the pro-level tools for your quest. The number one pro tip is to always seek out the metadata. Why? Because knowing where an image came from and what its context is can completely change its meaning. It turns a simple picture into a rich historical document. And these powerhouse digital libraries like Europeana, Gallica, or the Wellcome Collection are perfect for this. They often give you these amazing high-res scans of entire manuscripts. And finally, for the truly dedicated seeker, here is the ultimate tool, your secret weapon. When you find a really specific cryptic symbol, you don't have to just guess what it means. You can actually look it up in a specialized dictionary of sigils. This is how you really learn to read the alchemical language for yourself. So, there you have it. You've got the libraries, you've got the primary sources, and you have the advanced tools. You now have a map to some of the web's most fascinating and hidden corners. The only question left is, what secrets are out there waiting for you to uncover? You ever wonder how a single, kind of wild idea can morph into a fully playable game? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on that exact process. We're going to turn a creative spark into an entire pinball universe. It always starts with a question, right? Something like this. And look, we're not just talking about putting a new coat of paint on a classic game here. We're talking about fundamentally changing how it plays by injecting it with this totally new, chaotic theme. And the answer to that question? You get this. A dynamic, completely unpredictable world where, every single flick of the flipper could set off a magical chain reaction or maybe a catastrophic lab disaster. It's pinball, sure, but with a seriously explosive twist. Every big creation, whether you're talking about the Philosopher's Stone or a video game, it all begins with that one little initial spark. So let's dig into how the core concept of an alchemist's lab completely reshapes everything we thought we knew about pinball. Okay, so here's the big shift in focus. On the left, that's the pinball we all know, right? It's a pure test of skill, of your reflexes. But on the right, the game itself becomes your partner in crime, a partner in chaos. The lab equipment, the furnaces, the beakers, they aren't just background decoration. Oh no, they're interactive obstacles that can actually break, leak, and trigger these massive table-altering events. But here's the thing. For chaos to actually be fun, it needs some rules. So this is the part where we translate that core theme into real gameplay mechanics. And we're going to start with how the environment itself kind of comes alive. First thing on the list, environmental hazards. This is where the pinball table stops being a passive playing field. Just imagine hitting some cracked container and whoosh, a cloud of steam comes out and physically slows your ball down. Now you got to be way more precise. Or, hey, maybe you spill a puddle of molten metal that makes the ball just zip around like crazy. Suddenly, the environment isn't static anymore. It's an active player in the game with you. And beyond just those single hazards, we get to the really, really exciting part. Cascading effects. This isn't just one thing happening. It's a total domino effect. So remember that leaking beaker we talked about? Well, what if it drips onto a furnace, causing it to overheat? And that spills molten metal, which then burns a hole clean through the floor, revealing a hidden passage. The game is constantly changing as your lab literally falls apart around you. And here you can see all the little pieces that make that beautiful chaos work. We've got interactive equipment, we've got huge disasters like floods that completely change the ball's physics, dynamic gears, even crumbling floor tiles. It all adds up to a truly living, breathing, and honestly, a destructible world. So we have the rules for our chaotic world, but what does it actually look like? Well, the next logical step is to take these abstract ideas and map them out into a real visual layout. And what's so cool is you don't need some huge design team to get started. Just look at this prompt. It's a beautifully simple request to visualize the game using nothing but text and emojis. This just goes to show how a clear, focused prompt can be the fastest way to turn an idea into something you can actually see. And boom! Here's what that prompt gave us, the Alchemist's Workshop. We can already see the layout so clearly. That little fire emoji, that's our overheating furnace. The test tubes are breakable alembics. And that arrow at the bottom, that's a bubbling cauldron that can erupt and launch the ball straight up. Just like that, the concept is already taking shape. Now the next design, the Elemental Lab, this one brings in the forces of nature. That tornado emoji, that represents a steam cloud that's going to slow the ball down. The wave, well, that's a flooded area with totally different physics, and the magnet creates a field that can literally pull the ball right off its path. So you see, each design adds a whole new layer of challenge. And finally, we have the Grand Alchemical Machine. This layout adds another level of strategy altogether. Now we're dealing with collectible crystals for points, teleporters that can instantly zap the ball across the table, and powerful spring launchers to get to new spots. It's becoming less about just reacting and more of a puzzle you have to solve. All right, so designs on paper are one thing. They're cool, but the real magic, that happens when you actually bring them to life. This next phase is all about taking these concepts and turning them into something tangible, something you can actually play. And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, it's easy to dream up these complex systems of cascading disasters and environmental stuff, but can it actually be coded? More importantly, can you make it fun and, not a broken mess? And again, just look at the power of a simple, direct request. Build me a prototype. Not a full game, not some complex engine, just a single file that I can open in a web browser to see if the core idea even works. This is that make or break moment where the concept has to prove itself. And there it is. Simple, super accessible, and it works. The controls are as basic as they get, but the core mechanics are right there. When the ball hits the steam obstacle, it slows down. When it hits the molten metal, it speeds up. The foundational idea from our very first design slides is now a playable reality. And the bottom line is, the concept isn't just imaginative, it's actually fun. So the core game works, it's fun. But to make it truly special, we need that final thematic layer. This is where we go beyond just simple mechanics, and we inject a bit of real alchemy, using the magic of the cosmos to give every single element a deeper meaning. This table shows that final flourish in action. The bumpers aren't just bumpers anymore. Now they're imbued with planetary magic. So hitting the sun bumper gives you temporary invincibility, hitting the moon triggers a slow motion effect for more precise control, Mars boosts your destructive power. Each one is tied thematically to its celestial body, and that adds this really rich layer of strategy and lore to the whole thing. So there you have it. From a simple question to a chaotic, playable universe. This whole process, it's really a form of alchemy itself, transforming a basic concept into something golden. It just goes to show that with a clear vision and the right prompts, any idea can be brought to life, which really just leaves one last question to think about. All right, today we're going to crack the cosmic code of Renaissance alchemical art. We're diving into a mysterious world where science, spirituality, and secret messages were all tangled up together. So let's just jump right in with this. Take a look. This is an incredibly detailed engraving from the late 16th century. At first glance, it might just look like a really cluttered workshop, right? But don't be fooled. Every single object in here, from the musical instruments on the table to the chemical vessels by the fire, is a very deliberate piece of a complex cosmic map. So what are we really looking at here? Is it art? Is it science? Or is it some kind of coded message? Well, the amazing answer is, it's all three. This isn't just a picture. It's a spiritual manifesto, it's a scientific blueprint, and it's basically a data visualization of an entire worldview, all packed into one powerful image. To really get what's going on in this image, we have to try and think like a Renaissance alchemist, and that means we need to unlock a few secrets of their worldview. So let's start with the very first key. That first key is light. Now, for us, light is, well, it helps us see. But for thinkers of this era, light was so much more. It was a very real, physical, and even divine force that was actively shaping the world around them. And believing that had huge implications, blurring the lines between what we now call physics and theology. You know, the study of light, or optics, had this long, rich history. It all started way back with the ancient Greeks. Then it was refined into a really sophisticated science by brilliant Arabian scholars. And by the time the Renaissance rolled around, thinkers like the famous John Dee were convinced that light rays literally carried influence from the stars and planets right down here to Earth. And that scientific idea laid the foundation for something much, much grander. And here is that grander idea. Alchemists looked at the sun as a direct symbol of Christ. They believed its rays were the modus operandi, or, the method that God used to pour life and health and virtue into the world. So for an alchemist, sunlight wasn't just light. It was an active, spiritual ingredient in their work. Okay, let's move on to our second key, semiotics. Now that's just a fancy word for the theory of signs and symbols. But for alchemists, this wasn't some abstract academic thing. No, for them, it was about learning to read the secret alphabet that God used to write the universe itself. And I mean, they truly believed the world was a book. In their minds, every single thing, a plant, a rock, a star, was a signature that was personally inscribed by the Creator. And if you could just learn how to decipher these signatures, well, then you could understand the divine logic of the entire cosmos and the hidden purpose of everything in it. So, how did they break down this divine language? Well, they pretty much structured it into 3 types of signs. First, you have iconic signs, which physically look like the thing they represent. A good example is the Kabbalistic tree of life, which mirrors the structure of the universe. Second, there are indexical signs, which have a direct causal link, like how geometric shapes were seen to connect our earthly world to perfect divine forms. And finally, you have symbolic signs, which have a more conventional link, like the Hebrew letters for God's name, YHW, representing the very idea of divine unity. So we have our 2 keys, divine light and a secret alphabet. Now let's talk about the alchemists themselves. And it's really important to know they were not all the same kind of person. Not at all. Yeah, there was a huge distinction. On one side, you had the puffers. That was kind of a nickname for the charlatans and swindlers who were just obsessed with turning lead into gold to get rich. But on the other side, you had the theurgists. These were the spiritual philosophers whose goal wasn't earthly wealth, but the complete transformation of the human soul. Theurgy was their core practice. They believed that the human imagination wasn't just, daydreaming in your head. It was a potent actual force, an astral force. So through really focused rituals, a theurgist would try to use their imagination to connect with and actively channel these divine and astral energies, all for the sake of spiritual enlightenment. And you can bet this kind of work made you some enemies. This engraving by our alchemist Heinrich Kunrath actually shows him surrounded by his critics, who he drew as these grotesque monsters and fools. These figures represent the materialistic puffers, rigid theologians, and anyone else who just couldn't grasp his spiritual mission. All right, we have our keys, we understand the power of light, the language of signs, and the true mission of the spiritual alchemist. It's time. Let's go back to that enigmatic laboratory and finally crack the code. Looking at this image again, it should feel completely different now. It's not just a cluttered room anymore, is it? With our new understanding, it transforms into a coherent map of the alchemist's universe, where every single element has a deep and profound purpose. For instance, look closely underneath the main table. You can see a Latin phrase, disse bene mori, which means learn to die well. Now, this isn't about physical death. It's pointing straight to the central goal of spiritual alchemy, the death of the old, unenlightened, profane self, so you can be reborn into a higher state of consciousness. And this whole image just brilliantly shows how everything is connected. The tent on the left, that's an oratory for prayer, aura, which has to come before the physical work, labora. The fireplace, the heart of the lab, unites reason and experience. The musical instruments aren't just there for fun. They symbolize the divine, mathematical harmony of the entire cosmos. Even that tiny little mirror has a job. It's there to remind the alchemist, and us, of the importance of self-reflection. I mean, it goes even deeper. The chemicals listed on the jars are also deeply symbolic. One of them is labeled Azoth. To an alchemist, this wasn't just saltpeter. It was the divine life force itself, a stellar energy sent down from God through the rain to animate all of creation. It's the raw, divine spark that the alchemist is trying to work with. So when you put it all together, what you're looking at here is so much more than an illustration. It's a sophisticated tool. It's a kind of talisman, meticulously designed to focus the mind, to attract that divine light we talked about, and to create a sacred space where the physical and spiritual worlds can actually meet.
And this brings us to a final thought. This worldview, where science, art, and spirit were completely inseparable, is profoundly different from our own. It kind of leaves us with a question to think about. In our modern world, what have we gained by separating all these realms? And what might we have lost along the way?
All right, today we're doing something really cool. We're going to dive into a kind of digital alchemy. We're talking about taking ancient mystical knowledge and turning it into a modern video game. So let's just jump right into the big question here. How in the world do you take a library overflowing with these dense, historical, alchemical texts and turn that into a video game? I mean, how do you even start? Let's get into it. Okay, so to even try something this crazy, you gotta have a pretty ambitious vision, right? And this project, well, it was basically a modern alchemist's dream. And right from the get-go, the creator's goal was crystal clear. They said it themselves. They wanted to build more than just a game. The idea was to create this rich, super detailed historical database that would actually power the whole world. So it's not just fun, it's also educational and totally immersive. So the concept was a text adventure game. Think of it kind of like a D&D campaign. But here's the twist. Instead of slaying dragons, you're an apprentice alchemist. Maybe you're trying to figure out the world of early modern mining, or you're studying with a real historical master. Pretty cool, right? But here's the catch. To build a world that deep, you first have to crack open the secrets that are locked away in all those ancient texts. And for that, you're going to need some pretty powerful digital tools. And this is where the magic really happens. The key to this whole thing is something called natural language processing, or NLP for short. Basically, it's the tech that teaches a computer how to read, not just see words on a page, but to actually understand what they mean, how they fit together, to get the real meaning behind our language. So this is like the digital alchemist's toolkit. And it's not just one magic wand, it's a whole set of super precise software tools. With these, a computer can do some amazing things, like automatically pick out all the people and places in a text, figure out the grammar of a sentence, and even start to understand the connections between different ideas. Okay, so how does a machine actually read something like this? It's a pretty cool process. First, it breaks all the text down into tiny pieces, individual words or what they call tokens. Then it goes through and tags each word, figuring out if it's a noun, a verb, an adjective, and so on. After that, it maps out how all those words connect to each other in a sentence. And finally, bam, it starts recognizing and pulling out the important stuff, the people, the places, the key ideas. It's this really systematic way of taking language apart to find the meaning hidden inside. All right, so we've got all this raw data, but now what? How do you turn a pile of facts into a story that people actually want to play? Because let's be real, pulling out facts is one thing, but finding a good story, that's a whole other ballgame. And this is the really important part. The goal here isn't just to build, a Wikipedia of alchemy. No way. The tech is being used to dig into these really complex, scholarly arguments, to find the debates, the tensions, all the juicy themes that you can actually build a great story around for the game. So, for example, by digging through the lectures of someone like Terence McKenna, the developer found this amazing core conflict for the story. It's this epic struggle between the old, magical worldview and this new, dehumanizing mechanization. Now, that is a conflict you can build an entire game world on. But then, the project hit a wall. A big one. It was a problem that just analyzing text couldn't fix. They had to figure out how to decode these incredibly intricate, magical diagrams. And this brings up such a fascinating question, right? We've just seen how you can teach a computer to read words. But what do you do when the most important knowledge isn't in the words at all? What about all the pictures, the diagrams? And yeah, this was a huge hurdle. Even the creator said, look, I don't really understand how they work or how they're constructed. And that's the big problem, isn't it? If a human expert can't even figure it out, how on earth are you supposed to teach a machine to do it? We're talking about these incredibly complex geometrical diagrams from famous alchemists like Dr. John Dee, or the magical circles you'd find in the grimoires of someone like Dr. Rudd. I mean, these aren't just doodles. They are entire systems of knowledge, all encoded visually. So, this is where things get really interesting. The project takes this huge leap forward, moving beyond just language and into analyzing images. Essentially, they had to teach an AI how to understand ancient magic. And to crack this visual code, they needed a whole new set of tools. This time, a bunch of Python libraries made specifically for computer vision. You've got things like OpenCV, which is awesome for spotting basic shapes and lines. Then there are other tools that help clean up the images and pull out the more complicated details. So the way you teach an AI to see one of these diagrams is really methodical. It's all about layers. You start simple, clean up the image, make it grayscale, reduce any noise. Then you get the AI to find all the edges and the outlines of the shapes. From there, it starts analyzing the properties of each shape. And finally, you can actually use machine learning to train it to spot patterns and even figure out the rules for how these diagrams were made in the first place. And this right here, this is the end goal. It's so much more than just copying the picture. This whole process lets the software truly understand the diagram's parts. It can break it down, analyze the structure, and even start to guess at the rules the original alchemist used to draw it. How cool is that? And that really leaves us with a pretty mind-blowing thought, doesn't it? When you combine these two things, language AI and vision AI, you can decode and even interact with history in ways we never could before. So it makes you wonder, if AI can learn ancient magic, what other forgotten knowledge, what other secrets hidden away in old books and diagrams could you bring back to life? All right, let's talk about one of the biggest names from the Italian Renaissance, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. You know him. The brilliant young prince, the philosophical genius who could speak a dozen languages. He's basically the poster child for human potential. But is that the real story? You've probably seen this quote before. It's from his oration on the dignity of man, and for centuries it's been held up as this ultimate statement on human freedom. This is it, the moment we're all told that modern individualism was born. But what if we've gotten it completely backward? What if the point of all that freedom wasn't to become some great individual, an amazing artist, or a powerful king, but to do something way, way stranger? To erase yourself entirely. To get to the bottom of this, we first have to unpack the myth. The popular image of Pico is of this ultimate Renaissance man, right? A champion of humanism who believed we could literally will ourselves into being anything we wanted to be. His oration is treated like the Declaration of Independence for the modern person. It's this revolutionary moment where humanity finally steps into the spotlight, taking center stage away from God. It's a great story, but there are a couple of huge problems with it. For starters, there's no evidence Pico ever actually gave this legendary speech. And that famous title, The Oration on the Dignity of Man? Yeah, an editor just slapped that on decades after Pico was dead. So if the story we all know is built on shaky ground, what really happened? And that takes us to the real story. In 1486, a super ambitious 23-year-old Pico shows up in Rome. And he wasn't there to give one little speech, oh no. He came with a project so huge, so dangerous, it would cause a massive scandal and derail his entire life. You see, that text we call the oration, it was just the opening act. It was the preface for the main event, a gigantic intellectual showdown he was planning with the entire Christian world. And this was the heart of it all, his 900 conclusions. Not 9, not 90, but 900 theses. He basically sent out an open invitation to every scholar in Europe to come to Rome and debate him on these 900 points of philosophy, religion, and, well, some other stuff that got him into a lot of trouble. I mean, the ambition here is just off the charts. He wanted to stitch together all human knowledge into one unified system, but it was how he planned to do it that was so shocking. He claimed he could prove the truth of Christianity using two tools that the church absolutely freaked out: magic and the Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah. This was, to put it mildly, explosive. And the whole thing just blew up in his face, spectacularly. A commission appointed by the Pope immediately started investigating. They flagged 13 of his theses as heretical. But Pico, instead of apologizing, doubled down and published a fiery defense of his work. This made Pope Innocent VIII furious, and he condemned the whole lot, all 900. Pico had to flee, was eventually arrested in France, and his grand debut ended in total humiliation. So you're probably wondering, what was so bad about these secret ingredients? To really get what Pico was trying to do, we have to understand what he actually meant by magic and Kabbalah. Pico was the very first Christian scholar to really dive deep into Kabbalah and use it in a big way. He was convinced it was the secret, ancient wisdom given directly from God to Moses on Mount Sinai. He believed it held the keys to proving Christian doctrines, and since it came directly from God, he thought it was an even purer, more powerful source of truth than Greek philosophy. And when he says magic, you've got to be careful. He wasn't talking about witchcraft or making deals with demons. He condemned all that. For him, there were two kinds. What he was promoting was natural magic, which he saw as a kind of holy science. It was a practical tool for understanding the hidden patterns in God's creation and using them to climb step by step back to God. Okay, so now that we have all this context about the scandal, the 900 DCs, the magic, and the Kabbalah, let's go back to that oration. And when you look at it again, you realize, oh, this isn't a Declaration of Independence at all. It says syllabus. It's a roadmap. This is Pico's actual project. The oration lays out a step-by-step curriculum for mystical ascent. You start with philosophy to purify your soul. Then you study science to understand God's world. Then theology to know God directly. But for the final, most difficult stages, you need the advanced tools. Magic to travel up through the heavens, and Kabbalah to transform yourself into a pure spirit ready to finally merge with God. So, here's the absolute key. That freedom God gives Adam, the freedom to ordain for yourself the limits of your nature, wasn't about being free to choose a career or become a famous individual. It was the freedom to choose to start climbing this spiritual ladder. And what was the final destination? The ultimate goal? It's right there in his text. The whole point of the journey is not self-fulfillment, it's self-annihilation. The goal is to shed your very self, to completely disappear into the divine until you are one with your creator. It is literally the exact opposite of modern individualism. So, how in the world did this intense, mystical thinker, obsessed with Kabbalah and a holy form of magic, get turned into the secular icon of human freedom we all think he is today? Well, for a long time he wasn't. After the scandal, his work was pretty much toxic. It was tainted by heresy, and he was largely ignored for centuries. The myth we know is actually a much, much more recent invention. The big makeover really started in the late 1700s. German philosophers who were obsessed with new ideas of autonomy looked back at Pico's words about dignity and saw a reflection of their own modern ideas. Then, in 1860, the historian Jacob Burckhardt basically made Pico the superhero of his blockbuster book that invented our modern idea of the Renaissance. And finally, in the 20th century, this new and improved secular Pico was imported to America and became a star in Western civ classes everywhere. Pico's story is it's such a powerful reminder of how we tend to see the past through the lens of the present. We wanted a hero for our modern age of individualism, so we took a deeply religious, complex mystic and remade him in our own image. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Who else in history do we misunderstand in the very same way? All right, so when you picture a city, what do you see? Probably a map, right? You know, a grid of streets, some landmarks. But what if that's not the whole picture? What if a city isn't some static thing at all, but a giant, living collection of stories? Stories that we're writing every single day, just by moving through it. That's the idea we're going to dig into today, using the streets of ancient Rome as our guide. Okay, so the core of this is a really cool distinction between place and space. Now, a place is the map. It's the official city plan, the bird's eye view from Google Maps. It's all fixed, ordered, and geometric. But space, well, space is what happens when we humans actually move through that place. It's our shortcuts, the memories we have in a certain cafe, the unexpected conversations. It's the messy, human, street-level story. A place only becomes a real space when we practice it. So to really see how this works, let's meet our first character. He's a Roman poet named Propertius. And, well, he's a bit of a romantic, maybe a little bit of a drama queen, and on this particular day, he is having a really, really bad day. See, he has this simple, very personal plan, but he's about to find out that the city has a completely different agenda for him. I mean, look, his goal is super simple. He's a guy in love, and he's in a hurry. He just wants to zip across town to see his beloved, Cynthia. That's it. That's his whole story, his personal mission for the day. A simple two-step plan. What could possibly go wrong, right? Well, this is what goes wrong. What happens when your own little personal journey smacks headfirst into a massive citywide event? What do you do when your story gets completely steamrolled by the much, much bigger story of an entire empire? And here it is, his big excuse. He's late because the emperor, Augustus himself, decided this exact day was the perfect time to throw a gigantic party to open the brand new portico of Apollo. So, of course, the streets are totally jammed. His private romantic mission is brought to a dead stop by this huge public ceremony. The lover's path is literally being blocked by the emperor's power. But what's so fascinating is the weird state this puts him in. Think about it. He's not really part of the ceremony. He's not there cheering for Augustus. But he's also totally failing at being a lover on a mission. He's just stuck. He's trapped in this frustrating in-between zone that doesn't exist on any map. It's a whole other kind of space that got created when his personal plan crashed into the city's official one, a space of pure frustration. Now hold on to that idea, that third space. It's important. Okay, so let's leave our frustrated poet for a minute and meet our second guide to Rome. This guy's name is Varro. He's a famous Roman scholar. And where Propertius saw the city as this giant obstacle course, Varro saw it as something totally different. Almost like an archaeological dig, but instead of digging for old pots, he was digging for words. He was convinced that Rome's entire history was hiding right there, inside its language. Now, to really get Varro's point of view, we need this brilliant idea from a theorist named Mikhail Bakhtin. It's called a chronotope. It sounds super complicated, but it's not. It literally just means time-space. It's this idea that time and space aren't separate things. They're totally fused together. Think about your childhood home. It isn't just a physical building, is it? No, it's a place that's completely soaked in the time of your youth, full of memories. That is a chronotope. And for Varro, the entire city of Rome was just packed with these things. And Varro gives us a perfect example of this. Let's take one word, crepusculum. We just call it twilight. But for Varro, oh no, it was so much more. It was a whole chronotope packed into one word. Inside it, he saw a feeling. He called it doubtful light. He saw a whole people, the ancient Sabines, who he says brought the word to Rome. He even saw a political battle, the fight between the natural time of sunset versus the official, legal time when the praetor said all business had to stop. So in just one word, you get all these layers: time, place, culture, even conflict. Amazing, right? Okay, so we've got Propertius, the frustrated lover, and Varro, the word detective. What in the world do they have in common? Well, their two very different stories point to the exact same huge idea. We don't just live in our cities. We actively produce them every single day. This is the big idea from a philosopher named Henri Lefebvre. He said a city isn't some neutral box that we all just exist in. Nope. It's constantly being shaped, or as he put it, produced. And yeah, it's produced by big official power, like Emperor Augustus building his monuments. But, and this is the key part, it's also produced by us, by our everyday normal stuff, walking, talking, even getting stuck in a crowd, just like Propertius. And Lefebvre had this cool three-part way of looking at it. First, you've got the designed space. That's the official stuff, the maps, the big buildings, the way planners want it to be. Then there's the practiced space. That's how we actually use it, our daily routines, our shortcuts. And finally, there's the lived space. This is the deep stuff. Our memories, our feelings, the stories we tell about a place. It's where the city becomes personal.
So let's bring this back to our poet, Propertius. It fits perfectly. The designed space, that's Apollo's portico, this grand monument meant to scream imperial power. The practiced space, that's Propertius literally getting stuck, trying to move through the crowd. But the lived space, that's that in-between feeling he has, the frustration of not being a good citizen or a successful lover. That feeling, that is his third space. It's a whole new reality created when the official plan and his personal plan collided.
And this brings us full circle, right back to what we said at the beginning. As the theorist Michel de Certeau put it, space is a practiced place. A street on a map, it's just a line, a piece of geometry. But the second you walk down it, you transform it. You fill it with your own story, your own purpose, your own pace. You're the one who turns the planner's generic place into your own meaningful space. So, okay, frustrated poets, ancient scholars, why should we care about this today? Because this isn't just about ancient Rome, not at all. The big takeaway here is that we are all co-authors, writing the story of our own cities every single day. And I mean this literally. This isn't some abstract theory. You are doing this all the time. Every single time you walk out your front door, you are actively producing space. You're Propertius, with your own daily plans and frustrations. You're Varro, with your own memories layered on top of every single street corner. You are telling a story with your feet. Just think about your own day-to-day life. When you go somewhere, do you always take the official route that the GPS tells you? Or do you have your own personal shortcuts? Right there, that shortcut is you rewriting the city map. Or what about a public monument? It has its official history, sure, but for you, it might be the place you had a first date. That's your chronotope. And remember that time you got stuck and took some random detour and discovered a cool new street? That was your Propertius moment. You just created your own unexpected third space.
See, a city street is never just a street. It's a stage where all our little daily dramas play out. It's a blank page, and our footsteps are the ink. We are constantly writing and rewriting the story of the world around us, just by living in it. So the next time you walk out your door, think about this for a second. You're not just going from point A to point B. You are practicing a place, producing a space, and telling a story. The only real question is, what story are you going to write today?
Let's jump back to the 13th century and meet an absolutely fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty puzzling figure, Ahmad al-Buni. Now, this is a guy who lived at a really unique crossroads where mysticism, science, and yeah, even magic all intertwined to create this breathtaking system of thought. And this, right here, is the big question that kind of hangs over his entire legacy. How could one man be so revered as a Sufi saint that his tomb became a site of pilgrimage, while at the same time he's being called a heretic and a sorcerer by major theologians like Ibn Taymiyyah? We're going to unpack that mystery.
So, al-Buni was a Sufi master from North Africa who later settled in Cairo, and he wrote these incredibly detailed, dense books on what he called the occult sciences. But here's the kicker. These books were never meant for you and me. They were secret, designed for a small, initiated circle of his own students. And yet, despite that secrecy, their influence just exploded across the centuries.
Okay, so to really get a handle on al-Buni's universe and all the controversy around it, we first have to understand his most essential tool, the secret science of letters. And no, we're not talking about grammar or poetry here. We're talking about the very code of creation itself. This science is called letterism, or ilm al-huruf in Arabic, and the core idea, it is absolutely stunning. It suggests that the letters of the Arabic alphabet and the divine names of God they spell out aren't just symbols for sounds. No, they are the prima materia, the primordial stuff that reality itself is built from. Now, you might be thinking, hey, a sacred alphabet that structures the universe? That sounds kind of familiar. And you'd be right. A really great comparison is Jewish Kabbalah, which was actually developing around the same time. While Kabbalah is all about the Hebrew alphabet, al-Buni's letterism is all about the Arabic one. But they both share this profound vision that the alphabet is the master key to understanding the hidden architecture of God and the cosmos. This quote just nails the central idea. For people like al-Buni, the universe and the holy book, the Quran, they aren't two separate things. They are two different expressions of the exact same phenomenon, God's creative speech. It's like the universe is a text, and the text is a universe. So if the universe is really made of divine speech, what does that actually look like? How did al-Buni go about mapping this incredible cosmos? Let's take a look at his model. All right, take a look. At first glance, this might seem like a standard map of the universe from that time, with Earth in the middle. But look closer. Notice how every single sphere, from the divine throne way out at the edge, all the way down to the elements, is assigned specific letters of the Arabic alphabet. This isn't just an astronomy chart, it's a diagram of how God's speech radiates outward to form all of reality. Al-Buni breaks down this whole creation process into 4 stages, which is kind of like a Neoplatonic cascade. It all starts with the first world of invention, pure divine intellect. And from there, reality just emanates outward, flowing through the divine pen, the world's soul, and finally landing in the second world of origination, which is where we are, with the planets, the elements, and the material world.
And here's the part that you really have to get. The letters aren't just assigned to these levels like labels on a map. Albanini uses the word sown. They are literally planted inside every layer of creation. So a letter isn't just a mark on a page. It's an active, you might even say angelic force that's present in everything, from the highest spiritual plane right down to a rock on the ground. Okay, this is where things get really wild. This brings us to Albani's most radical, most secret teaching. Because if letters are what structure the cosmos, he believed the regular old alphabet was only telling part of the story. He was about to completely rewire the ancient rules of astrology. And here's the little discrepancy that unlocks the whole secret. The Arabic alphabet has 28 letters. That's a fact. But Albuni, in his secret texts, insists that the true cosmic alphabet, the one that governs everything, has 48 letters. So where did those extra 20 letters come from? 48. That's the number. He claimed this was the true number of forces, or letters, that shape all of reality. And he broke them down into 3 very distinct tiers. His system is just, it's beautiful in its symmetry. The 48 letters are split into 3 groups. First, you have 7 luciform or light-based letters, and they function like the planets. Then there are 12 spiritual letters which act as the zodiac, and finally, you've got 29 corporeal letters, the physical alphabet plus 1, which make up the material world. He basically just reskinned the entire astrological system onto this new secret framework. So what were these 7 luciform letters? Well, get this. It was a code. Albani gave a series of numbers that, if you translate them using a system called Abjad numerology, spell out the Arabic phrase bi'al sifat, which means by means of the attributes. The 7 planets weren't planets at all. They were secretly the 7 primary names or attributes of God, like the all-knowing and the all-powerful. And the second secret is just as profound. Those 12 spiritual letters that took the place of the zodiac, yeah, they weren't letters either. They were the 12 faculties of human consciousness: hearing, sight, touch, imagination, reason. You get the idea. The zodiac wasn't out there in the sky. For Albuni, it was in here, inside the human mind. So what does this all mean? I mean, if the planets are actually God's attributes, and the zodiac is actually our own consciousness, that completely flips the script on humanity's role in the cosmos. We are no longer just these passive things getting zapped by cosmic forces. We are absolutely central to how the whole system works. This was Albuni's most revolutionary idea. In traditional astrology, the planets' rays hit the Earth directly. But in Albuni's system, the divine attributes, his planets, cannot influence the material world directly. They must pass through the filter of human faculties, his zodiac. Humanity becomes this absolutely essential bridge between the divine and the material world. But here's the twist. Not all human filters are the same. Albuni argued that for most of us, our spiritual faculties are like a radio receiver that's just full of static. But saints, through intense spiritual practice, they've purified their faculties. They've become perfect, crystal clear channels. They are the ones who can purely transmit God's creative power into the world, which gives a kind of scientific explanation for their miracles. And this wasn't just abstract theory, it had very practical applications. For instance, to create a talisman for stability, you needed the right astrological timing. Sure, the moon aligned with Jupiter, but that wasn't enough. The person making the talisman had to be in a state of ritual purity, fasting, and deep inner peace. They had to combine the physical act with the spiritual act of chanting God's name. The state of the operator was just as crucial as the state of the stars. Now, it's really important to see that Albuni's work didn't just pop up out of nowhere. He was part of a much bigger intellectual current that was sweeping across the Mediterranean, a whole movement that was trying to uncover the hidden rules of reality. The late 12th and early 13th centuries were truly an age of esotericism. You've got Jewish thinkers like Abraham ibn Ezra and Maimonides, and fellow Sufi masters like the great Ibn al-Arabi, all digging into the hidden links between scripture, cosmology, and human power. It was this amazing cross-faith wave of thought, with ideas flowing back and forth between Muslim and Jewish intellectual circles. So to wrap it all up, Albuni wasn't trying to debunk or reject astrology. He was doing something way more ambitious. He was claiming to unveil its true inner meaning. His system took astrology and folded it into this vast, incredibly sophisticated Islamic cosmology.
basically arguing that the stars were just the outer clothing for a much deeper reality, woven from the very speech of God. And all this leaves us with a final, really challenging thought. Albuni's universe just doesn't care about our neat little modern categories. His work is a religious text, a scientific paper on causation, and a practical magic manual all at the same time. And that makes you ask a pretty fundamental question. Where do we draw the line between these things? Or, in a world like his, does that line even exist at all? Have you ever had a cool idea for a game pop into your head and just wondered, how does that actually become a thing? You know, how does a tiny little seed of an idea grow into a full, complex, and fascinating game? Well, today, we're going to break down that exact journey, watching a single thought blossom into a living, breathing world. Everything, and I mean everything, starts with a spark. A single, simple sentence just like this one. This isn't some 100-page design document. Nope. This is the core DNA of an entire game concept, all packed into just a few lines. An RPG auto-battler, you draft a team, and you watch them go. That's it. That's our starting point. So, you've got the spark. How do you turn that into a fire? Well, you start by building the core gameplay loop, the actual foundation that everything else is going to be built on top of. And that loop breaks down into these 4 simple steps. First up, the drafting phase. This is where you make all the big calls, picking your characters, your gear, the whole shebang. Then, team composition, where you put your squad together. After that, your job's done. It's hands off. The team explores a random dungeon and gets into auto battles. So you're the master strategist up front, and then you get to just kick back and watch your grand plan either succeed or fail spectacularly. So what makes this whole loop so addictive? Well, this slide nails it. Procedurally generated dungeons mean you're never going to play the same game twice. You have real agency, real control in your choices, but you also get the fun of watching it all play out automatically. That creates insane replayability, especially when you start unlocking new stuff for your next run. Okay, but a great game is more than just slick mechanics, right? It needs heart. It needs personality. I mean, stats and items are one thing, but how do you make us actually care about these little digital heroes we're sending into danger? How do you give these characters a soul? You do it by making personality a core mechanic. And no, we're not just talking about some flavor text in a character description. In this design, a character's personality has a direct, real impact on how they perform, which adds this whole other layer of strategy to think about. For instance, let's look at the Optimist. Give that personality to a cleric, and their positive attitude actually helps the team avoid nasty effects. But give that same optimism to a fighter, bam! Now it's a party-wide shield at the start of a fight. And then you've got the Cynic, the total opposite. A Cynic cleric heals for more, sure, but there is such a downer it hurts team morale. A Cynic fighter, though, they dig in their heels and get tougher when they're outnumbered. And this is where it gets really interesting, because personality can introduce risk. A daredevil thrives on chaos. Their spells are way stronger, but they could totally backfire. So do you take that gamble? Then you have the Scholar, who is all about calculated moves, analyzing enemies, removing debuffs, and hitting them right where they know it hurts. 2 totally different ways to play. So, you've built your perfect team. The Optimist Cleric, the Scholar Wizard, the Cynic Fighter. Everything is going great. But let's be honest, perfect plans can be kinda boring. The best stories always come from a little bit of chaos. So what happens when things don't go according to plan? You lean into it. You embrace the chaos. And this is where the genius idea of trap cards comes into play. These are choices, items, characters, you name it, that look objectively bad at first, but are secretly hiding some kind of unique, situational, and sometimes game-winning potential. Think about it like this. A standard sword is fine. It's reliable, but the cursed sword of backfiring, now that's a gamble. Most of the time, it might be the most powerful weapon in the game, but every now and then, wham, it's gonna hurt you. It forces this incredible choice. Play it safe or bet big on the high-risk option that could win you the entire run. And this idea just spreads to everything. Haunted armor slows you down, but hey, a friendly ghost fights for you. The coward is useless in a brawl, but their paranoia makes them the best trap spotter in the world. Every single disadvantage is balanced with this unique, powerful upside that makes your decisions really, really interesting. And the king of all wildcards is the Fool. This class is just pure, beautiful chaos. They might trip into a pressure plate and accidentally disarm it. They might try to cast a spell and turn the enemy into a harmless chicken instead. Their secret is a hidden luck factor, which basically means that over time, their screw-ups tend to work out in your favor. It's brilliant.
Okay, so we've got mechanics, we've got personality, we've got chaos, all layered together. It's becoming this really rich, complex system. But how do you actually show all of this to the player without it just being a confusing mess of numbers? How do you visualize it all with simple, elegant tools?
Well, the answer is in smart design and what I'd call cute UI hacks. You don't need a massive graphics budget to make a world that feels alive and is actually easy to understand. You just need to be clever.
I mean, just look at this. This is genius in its simplicity. With just a few emojis, the entire dungeon is instantly readable. You know where the doors are, where the rats are, where the treasure is. This kind of clarity lets you focus on the action and the story that's being told, not on trying to figure out the map.
And the story unfolds with all these cool little UI elements. A little explosion emoji for a critical hit. Damage numbers are colored, red for fire, green for healing, you get it. And a running adventurer's log gives you the play-by-play, so you feel like you're right there with your team every step of the way.
All right, now for the final and maybe the most brilliant layer of depth. What if magic items weren't static? What if their powers changed completely depending on which class was holding them?
Check this out. Take the Wand of Ember Flame. A fighter can use it to shoot a basic fireball. Pretty cool. But put that same wand in a wizard's hands, now they're summoning a massive meteor strike. On the flip side, a wizard trying to swing a giant sword gets, well, a weak, clumsy attack. But that same sword on a fighter unleashes a devastating spin move.
And this idea works across the board. A holy symbol lets a cleric smash undead, but it gives a rogue a stealth bonus. The boots of the Windstrider help a cleric heal better on the move, but they give a rogue an extra dodge. The item itself adapts to who's using it, which just blows the strategic possibilities wide open. And there you have it. We started with just one sentence. And by adding layer after layer of mechanics, of personality, of chaos, and dynamic items, we've ended up with this rich, interconnected system. It's a living world, all born from a simple thought. This whole journey just goes to show that every complex, engaging system you've ever loved started out as just one simple spark. It's a really powerful reminder of what a single idea can become. So the real question is, what idea are you going to bring to life next? All right, let's dive into a real historical cold case. We're on the hunt for a mysterious book about alchemy that just, poof, vanished from the records. But as you're about to see, the key to unlocking this whole thing, it wasn't some hidden map or a secret society. Turns out, it all came down to a single typo. It's a pretty wild question when you think about it, right? What really happens when a piece of history just disappears? Well, sometimes, if you look close enough, you can still find its ghost. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. Okay, so our search begins right here. We're looking for a book called Liber de Lapide Philosophico by an author named Fabre de Dai. And right away, we hit a wall. A total dead end. I'm talking no reliable sources, no confirmed author, zip. It's almost like the book and the guy who supposedly wrote it never even existed. So let's really break this down. Let's look at the anatomy of this dead end. Why was a search that seems so straightforward actually so impossible? Well, here's our first big problem. That title, Liber de Lapide Philosophico, it just means book on the philosopher's stone in Latin. And the thing is, that was a super common title for alchemy books back in the day. Imagine trying to find a specific book just called The Novel. You're not just looking for a needle in a haystack. You're looking for one specific needle in a haystack made entirely of other needles. So this left us with two massive hurdles. First, a title so generic it was almost impossible to trace. And second, an author, this Fabre de Dai, who was a complete ghost in the historical record. I mean, researchers hit a total brick wall. There was no confirmed author with that name, no known manuscripts, absolutely no context for when or where this thing was even written. Every single search just spiraled into more confusion with dozens of other similarly titled works. The trail went completely cold. But then a breakthrough. A new way of searching, just a slight shift in how we looked at the problem, and one single clue changed everything. And this is it. This is the key that broke the whole case wide open. You see, searching for Fabre de Dai got us nowhere. But what if we search for Guglielmo Fabre de Dai? That's when everything changed. It was just a simple transcription error all along, a typo. Our ghost finally had a first name, Guglielmo.
This new name led us straight to our Rosetta Stone, a book by the scholar Chiara Cristiani called Il Papa e l'Alchimia. That's the Pope and Alchemy. And her work, well, it definitively identified Guglielmo Fabri as the personal physician to a 15th century pope and the author of our long-lost book. The ghost finally had a face.
Okay, so we found the book, but what's actually in it? This is where the story gets really, really good. We're talking a high-stakes drama where faith, medicine, and magic all collide.
You know, this wasn't some boring technical manual. It was a conversation, a consultation. Researchers described this incredible scene of the aging pope who approaches Fabri, hoping the elixir might cure a painful paralysis in his hand. He wasn't just curious about turning lead into gold, he was desperate for a cure.
And get this, the pope wasn't just any pope. He was anti-Pope Felix V, a huge, controversial figure during a major split in the Catholic Church in the 1440s. So this wasn't some quiet scholarly project happening in a library. It was unfolding right in the middle of all this European political and religious chaos.
So Fabri's work was laid out in 3 parts. First, he makes the case that, yeah, transmutation is philosophically possible. Then, he gets into the medical benefits of what he calls potable gold, the elixir itself, and finally, he gives a kind of decoder ring for the secret coded language of alchemy. This was serious stuff, a blend of science, medicine, and esoteric knowledge, all written for one of the most powerful people in the world.
And what's so cool is that this one recovered story, it just blows the doors open on a much wider and frankly weirder history. It turns out the Catholic Church, which we might think would just condemn alchemy, actually had this long, complicated, and kind of secret relationship with it. This timeline really shows you this fascinating shift. Back in 1317, Pope John XXII bans fraudulent alchemy, mostly because he's worried about people making counterfeit money. But fast forward a century to our guy, anti-Pope Felix V, and he's actively looking for an alchemical cure. Keep going into the Renaissance, and you've got popes like Sixtus IV and the famous Medici Pope Leo X, not only collecting alchemy books, but actually paying its practitioners. Their whole attitude had completely flipped.
So what this all really tells us is that the old story of church versus science is just way too simple. When it came to alchemy, the papacy wasn't just about opposition. It was this complex dance of regulation against fraud, but also deep intellectual curiosity and even direct patronage, especially when they thought a medical miracle might be on the table.
You can see that whole evolution so clearly right here. The early motivation was all about economics, cracking down on fraud. Then, with our story about Felix V, it becomes personal and medical, a desperate search for a cure. By the Renaissance, it's all part of this humanist revival of ancient wisdom. And later on, it's actually being folded into serious Jesuit philosophy. The Church's reasons kept changing, totally reflecting the big ideas of each era. So, let's bring it all home. Why does this whole story about one lost book actually matter today? Well, because it's a perfect example of how we can go from a simple typo to uncovering an entire hidden history.
It really goes to show you just how fragile history can be. A single, tiny transcription error almost completely wiped out this incredible story. An anti-pope's desperate quest for an alchemical cure. Fixing that one little mistake brought a whole lost world and a much more complicated version of the past right back into the light.
And that leaves us with one last kind of mind-blowing thought, doesn't it? If a story this big, this important, can be completely hidden by a single typo, well, it just makes you wonder, right? How many other histories are still out there, just sitting in an archive, hidden in plain sight, waiting for one person to notice the one little detail that everyone else missed?
You ever see a picture, and you just know there's more to it than meets the eye? Well, today we're diving into a world where science, philosophy, even spirituality wasn't written down in plain old text. Nope, it was communicated through this secret language of really bizarre but also beautiful images. So, you ready to crack the code with me?
Okay, take a look at this. I mean, what is that, right? Looks like something out of a wild fantasy novel. But believe it or not, hundreds of years ago, this was a science textbook. Seriously, it's an instruction manual, a deep philosophical text, and a spiritual guide all wrapped up in one incredibly cryptic picture.
And yeah, that leads us right to the big question, doesn't it? What on earth were these alchemists trying to tell us with all these strange pictures? You know, kings and queens, green lions devouring the sun. What secrets are they hiding right there in plain sight? Okay, so to get this, we have to completely change how we look at these things. They're not just illustrations. Think of it more like a coded language, a really complex one designed to share some of the most profound and, back then, super dangerous ideas you could imagine.
And this is where the real magic happens. It's all about fusion. The alchemists, they were smart. They knew that if you combine words and pictures, you create these layers of meaning that, honestly, words alone just can't touch. This wasn't just about sharing information. No. This was meant to literally change the way you see the world.
But that kind of begs the question, right? Why go through all this trouble? I mean, why not just write it down? What was the point of this whole elaborate, secret visual code?
Well, there were a few really good reasons. First off, these pictures were basically a visual recipe, you know? They encoded the different stages of their great work. But it was also about secrecy. The allegory acted like encryption, keeping this powerful knowledge away from people who, let's be honest, probably shouldn't have it. And get this, they weren't just instructions. They were also meant to be used for meditation, things you'd stare at and contemplate. And maybe the coolest part? The mix of words and pictures was designed to spark something, well, beyond logic, like a sudden flash of insight, a real aha moment.
So, how did this secret language get around? Let's do a quick tour of some of the key books that spread these symbols all over Europe.
And man, this timeline really shows how fast everything changed. We start in the 1470s with the Splendor Solis. Think gorgeous hand-painted manuscripts that only like the richest of the rich could ever see. But then, just a few decades later, you get woodcuts in books like the Rosarium Philosophorum, and suddenly these images are way more common. And then things get really wild with the Atalanta Fugians. It actually paired these images with music and poems. But the real game changer, the thing that blew it all wide open, the printing press. It took these secret symbols and basically put them in everyone's hands.
And I mean, just look at the difference. It's night and day. On one side, you've got Splendor Solis. Every single one is a unique, stunningly colored work of art made for some rich patron. And on the other side, the woodcuts from the Rosarium. Bold, graphic, black and white, and mass-produced. This wasn't just a new art style. It was a total revolution. This one piece of tech, the printing press, yanked alchemy out of the dusty libraries of the elite and put it into the hands of a whole new audience. It completely changed the game.
Okay, now for the really fun part. Let's put on our codebreaker hats. We're going to learn to read this secret language by diving into 3 of the absolute most important symbols in all of alchemy. Ready?
All right, symbol number 1. You see this one everywhere, the king and the queen. This whole image represents a core idea in alchemy. They called the conjunctio, which basically means the secret marriage.
So what's it all about? Well, the king, also called Sol, he represents the sun, sulfur, the fixed, active part of things. The queen, Luna, she's the moon, Mercury, the flowing, passive part. And their union, what the alchemists called the chemical wedding, is the crucial first step. It's this beautiful idea that you have to bring together 2 total opposites to create something brand new, something transcendent.
And look, the alchemists weren't shy about this at all. Here's a quote from Michael Myers' famous book, Atalanta Fugians. He's not being subtle, is he? He's basically spelling it out for you. The entire secret to the Philosopher's Stone is figuring out how to make this union happen. Okay, so if the king and queen are all about that sacred union, our next symbol, well, it's something way more violent, way more mysterious. Let's talk about the green lion. The green lion. Man, this thing is a symbol of just raw, devouring power. It usually stands for a super corrosive acid or solvent. They called it vitriol that could supposedly dissolve anything. Even gold, the so-called perfect metal, which you often see represented as the sun. But here's the key thing to get. This isn't just about destruction for destruction's sake. It's about a necessary breakdown. You have to destroy the old form to make room for the new.
And this was not just a metaphor, you guys. Michael Meyer, the same guy from before, he actually lists the green lion as one of the 3 essential ingredients for the whole process. So for them, this was a real, tangible, and incredibly powerful force for change.
All right, our last symbol for today takes us right back to the beginning of the whole alchemical journey. And it takes us into the darkness. This is the stage they called nigredo, which translates to the blackening.
Nigredo is all about decomposition, putrefaction, decay. The imagery is, well, it's pretty grim. You see a lot of crows, skulls, bodies lying in tombs. And in the actual lab, this was a real thing. It was the moment when all the materials would turn black and rot. But of course, symbolically, it stands for something much deeper.
It's the idea that before anything new can be born, the old version has to completely fall apart and die.
And this quote from the Rosarium Philosophorum just nails it, doesn't it? And revives the putrefied body. It's so brilliant because it's describing an actual chemical process, but it's also this powerful metaphor for death and resurrection. You know the saying, you got to go through the darkness to get to the light.
So what happened to this whole secret language? Well, as the scientific revolution started taking over Europe, the, let's say, practical side of alchemy kind of faded away. But this incredible imagery? Oh, it didn't disappear. Not at all. It just found a new life and a new purpose.
Because when you step back and look at all these images together, you realize something huge. This was a complete system. It was never just about chemistry. It was a lens for seeing the entire universe, the physical, the psychological, the spiritual, as all one interconnected thing, all speaking this same powerful, symbolic language.
So yeah, modern science took the lead, and alchemy as a practice kind of fizzled out. But its symbols? They got a second wind. They were rediscovered by artists, by esoteric groups. And then way later, you have psychologists like Carl Jung who looked at them and saw not chemical recipes, but these deep, profound maps of the human psyche, the journey of becoming a whole person. And for us today, they're just this incredible window into a time when people saw the universe not as a cold, dead machine, but as a living, breathing, symbolic poem.
And that leaves us with one last thing to chew on. If this, all this rich, multi-layered symbolic art, was the visual language of science back then, what's the visual language of our science now? Think about it. The data visualizations we see, the infographics, the complex computer models, what stories are they telling? What are they hiding? And what are they revealing about how we see our world today? You know, when we think of academic scholarship, we usually picture these dense, heavy books, right? Stuff that feels kind of locked away. But what if we could take all that complex research and, well, transmute it, just like an alchemist, into something that's actually fun? Today we're going to dive into that exact process, turning these deep academic texts into playable, engaging games.
But that begs a pretty big question. How on earth do you take the raw material of historical research, something that can feel, let's be honest, a little intimidating?
I mean, look at this. This is the real deal. It's a page from a scholarly text just packed with footnotes and arguments for a super specific audience. It's brilliant for sure, but it's not exactly light reading. This, right here, this is our lump of lead.
And somehow manage to transform it into this?
Yeah, a vibrant, interactive world that practically begs you to jump in and play. This is our goal. So how do we get from that dense page to this amazing experience? Let's break it down.
All right, first up, the alchemical puzzle. We've got to figure out how to unlock these ancient texts. See, the big challenge is that alchemy was never just one simple thing. It was this fascinating, kind of messy mix of early chemistry, deep spiritual philosophy, and even religious belief. And the original texts, they reflect all of that, which makes them incredibly rich, but also really tough to get through. So, Section 2, Decoding the Source Texts. This is where we start digging for that little spark of inspiration, the cool ideas that can become the heart of a game. Check this out. This quote shows that an alchemist's lab wasn't just a place for mixing chemicals. It was also a place for prayer. The physical work and the spiritual journey were totally intertwined. I mean, come on. That is a fantastic theme for a game. And there's actually a word for this blending of different ideas: syncretism. Alchemists were absolute masters of it, pulling concepts from Greek philosophy, Christian theology, you name it. Understanding this helps us see that the world of alchemy was this buzzing, vibrant, and yeah, sometimes contradictory, intellectual space. Okay, so we've got our themes. Now for what I think is the most critical step, forging the game mechanics. This is where the real magic happens. This is where we turn abstract knowledge into actual playable rules.
Here's how it works. You take a cool insight from the research and you ask a simple question. How can a player do this? So the idea of scientific analysis of old labs becomes a lab reconstruction mode in the game. The concept of combining theory and practice becomes these cool dream sequences where you solve puzzles using what you learned in the lab. This table right here is basically the blueprint for turning reading into doing.
So what does the final creation even look like? Let's jump into some of these alchemical worlds and check out the results of our experiment.
First up, something a little chaotic: alchemy pinball.
Forget the quiet, studious alchemist. This game imagines the lab as this place of wild, volatile, physical reactions. It's all about leaning into the messy, fun, experimental side of it all.
The mechanics here are all about awesome chain reactions. You hit an alembic, it cracks and leaks steam, and boom, that steam ignites a furnace somewhere else. It's a dynamic system that perfectly captures that unpredictable, sometimes explosive nature of early experiments.
Okay, now let's completely switch gears and look at a totally different vibe. This concept is a strategic board game. So instead of chaos, the focus here is on careful planning, managing your resources, and just plain out winning your opponent.
The gameplay is pretty easy to pick up, but it gets deep. You place your little alchemist tokens on the board to grab elements like fire or water. But, and this is the fun part, you can also place a daemon token, like a little spirit, to block your opponent from getting what they need. It becomes this awesome race to see who can complete their alchemical formulas first.
So these game ideas are fun, right? But there's a much bigger picture here. The real goal, the modern philosopher's stone, if you will, is to totally change how we learn about these complex topics.
This is the absolute key. We're shifting from passive to active learning. It's the difference between just reading about an experiment in a textbook and actually doing that experiment in a game to solve a puzzle. One is just memorizing facts, the other is building real understanding.
And honestly, this stuff really works. Games are such powerful learning tools because they get you involved. When you have to make choices, when you see the consequences, you become emotionally and intellectually invested in a way a textbook just can't replicate. And that brings us to one last really exciting question. We've been talking about alchemy, but this whole process could work for almost any field of study. So you have to wonder, what other incredible, hidden worlds are out there, locked away in scholarship, just waiting for someone to come along and turn them into a game?
All right, welcome. Today, we're doing something really cool. We're going to get inside the head of a game designer and break down a board game concept called the Alchemist's Lab. We're going to see how it goes from just a tiny idea to a full-blown game of strategy and, well, a little bit of chaos.
You know, every single game out there starts with just a spark, right? For this one, it was this simple idea. And what's amazing is right there in that one sentence, you can see the entire DNA of the game. You've got this careful, scientific work of alchemy, but it's constantly at risk from total disaster. And it's that push and pull, that tension between creation and chaos that we're really going to dig into.
Okay, so first things first. You can't have a disaster in a lab if you don't have a lab, right? So this first part is all about laying that groundwork. We're talking about the main goal of the game and the key pieces you'll be playing with.
So, the whole game runs on a really popular mechanic called worker placement. It's basically the engine of your lab. You've got these little alchemist tokens, your workers, and you get to decide where they go to work each turn. But here's the catch. Once a spot's taken, it's usually blocked for everyone else. That means you've got to make some really tough calls about what's most important, turn after turn.
And here they are, the four main pillars of the whole game. First, you've got your lab tiles. This is your workshop, your playground. Then, the alchemist tokens. These are your people, your workforce. And then you've got these two forces constantly battling it out. The disaster cards bringing the chaos, and the healing medicines that let you fight back and clean up the mess.
All right, so we've got all the pieces, but how does it actually play? I mean, what do you do on your turn? Any good game needs what we call a game loop, a clear, repeatable structure that gives the whole thing a nice rhythm. It's all broken down into 3 simple steps. First, you build stuff. That's the building phase, where you get to expand your lab. Second, you do stuff. That's the placing phase, where you put your alchemist to work. And third, you deal with stuff. That's the event phase, where you draw a card and, well, see what fate has in store for you.
And you can even see in the design notes just how deliberate this flow is. This isn't random at all. It's a structure specifically designed to build up that tension. Think about it. You invest in your lab, you decide where your precious workers go, and only after all that do you find out what crazy new problem you have to deal with. It's brilliant.
So in that building phase, you're adding tools like these to your workshop. But here's the key thing to get. These tiles aren't just for looks. Not at all. Each one is a spot where you can take an action. You put a worker on the crucible, you're mixing ingredients. You put one on the research desk, you're discovering new recipes. The way you build your lab is your strategy. It's that simple.
Okay, let's be real. A game where you just build a perfect lab and nothing ever goes wrong, that would be super boring, right?
A good game absolutely needs conflict. And in the Alchemist's lab, that conflict comes bubbling and brewing right out of a deck of disaster cards. I love this part. This deck of cards is what I like to call the disaster engine. It's the heart of all the tension in the game. It's what guarantees that your lab is never, ever 100% safe. And that uncertainty, that's what makes every single decision you make, what to build, where to put your alchemists, suddenly feel so much more important. So let's take a look at a classic lab accident, a mercury spill. Bam! The effect is super simple and immediate. Your healthy alchemist, who's a green token, is now sick, and they turn into a yellow token. It's this brilliant, clear visual cue that screams, uh-oh, I've got a problem I need to deal with and fast.
But it's not always that straightforward. Check this out, a viral infection. This one's a little different. It's conditional. Got the right medical supplies? You're fine. If you don't, your alchemist is completely out of commission. This is so smart because it shows how the game's chaos isn't just about random bad luck, it's actively testing how well you've prepared for different kinds of trouble.
So the game is constantly throwing these curveballs at you, but, and this is so important, it also gives you the tools to solve them. You're not just a victim here. So let's flip the script and talk about the solutions, because this is where the real strategy of the game kicks in. Okay, this right here is the big aha moment in the game's design. For a lot of disasters, there's a specific direct counter. A toxic fume release card gets drawn. That sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? But if you were smart and you planned ahead by building a fume hood, you just solved the problem before it was ever even a problem. It creates this amazing back and forth of threat and preparation.
And look, it's spelled out right there in the rules. The tile's function is super clear. It ventilates fumes. The benefit? Even clearer. It protects your workers. This isn't just a cute, thematic touch. It's a core game mechanic that actively rewards you for thinking ahead and building your lab strategically.
But what if you didn't see it coming? What if you couldn't prevent the disaster? Well, you can still fix it. And I absolutely love how this works. Your alchemist gets sick or burned, and their token just changes color. Easy to see. But healing isn't just some generic heal button. Nope. To cure sickness, you have to use salt. To heal a burn, you need vitriol. The theme is baked right into the gameplay. It's so elegant.
All right, let's bring it all home. We've looked at the pieces, the turn structure, the things that can go wrong, and how you can fix them. So what's the big picture design philosophy here? What are the key ideas that make this whole concept click?
So, what's the final formula? It really boils down to 4 main ideas that all work together. First, you've got this great balance of risk and reward. The chance of disaster makes every little success feel like a huge victory. Second, you, the player, have agency. You're never just helpless. There's always a tool or a strategy to fight back. Third, the theme and the mechanics are totally intertwined. You're not just healing, you're using actual alchemical ingredients to fix specific problems. And last but not least, everything makes sense. There's a clear cause and effect, which makes the game feel fair, even when things are literally exploding.
And that pretty much wraps up our deep dive. It's just so cool to see how a single sentence can blossom into a game with all these layers of strategy, theme, and tension. So I'll leave you with this question. Put on your game designer hat for a second. What's the one rule you would add to the Alchemist's lab? I'd love to know. Thanks so much for joining me.